Welcome to Pastor Andrew's Inspirations. If you enjoy these videos, please click on the red subscribe button and the bell for notifications. Today, we will be talking about the biblical names starting with B. Baal was a title and honorific meaning owner, Lord, in the Northwest Semitic languages spoken in the Levant during antiquity. From its use among people, it came to be applied to gods. Scholars previously associated the theonym with solar cults and with a variety of unrelated patron deities, but inscriptions have shown that the name Baal was particularly associated with the storm and fertility god Hadad and his local manifestations. The Hebrew Bible includes use of the term in reference to various Levantine deities, often with application towards Hadad, who was decreed as a false god. That use was taken over into Christianity and Islam, sometimes under the form Beelzebub in demonology. The spelling of the English term Baal derives from the Greek, which appears in the New Testament and Septuagint, and from its Latinized form, which appears in the Vulgate. These forms, in turn, derive from the vowelless Northwest Semitic form. The word's biblical senses as a phonetic deity and false gods generally were extended during the Protestant Reformation to denote any idols, icons of the saints or the Catholic Church generally. In such context, it follows the Anglicized pronunciation and usually omits any mark between its two A's. In close transliteration of the Semitic name, the Ayin is represented as Baal. In the Northwest Semitic languages, Ugaritic, Phoenician, Hebrew, Amorite, and Aramaic, the word Baal signified owner, and by extension Lord, a master or husband. In Akkadian, it is Belu. In Amharic, it is Baal. In Arabic, it is Baal with an apostrophe L. Baal and Baal still serve as the words for husband in modern Hebrew and Arabic, respectively. They also appear in some contexts concerning the ownership of things or possession of traits. The feminine form is Ba'ala, meaning mistress, in the sense of a female owner or lady of the house, and still serving as a rare word for wife. Suggestions in early modern scholarship also included comparison with the Celtic god Belinus, like the En in Sumerian, the Akkadian Belu, and Northwest Semitic Baal apostrophe Al, as well as its feminine form, Baalah, was used as a title of various deities in the Mesopotamian and Semitic pantheons. Only a definitive article, genitive, or epithet, or context could establish which particular god was meant. Baal was also used as a proper name by the 3rd millennium BCE, when he appears in a list of deities at Abu Salabik. Most modern scholarship asserts that this Baal, usually distinguished as the Lord, Ha-Baal, was identical with the storm and fertility god Hadad. It also appears in the form Baal-Haddu. Scholars propose that as the cult of Hadad increased in importance, his true name came to be seen as too holy for any but the highest priest to speak aloud, and the alias Lord was used instead. As Bel was used for Marduk among the Babylonians, and Adonai for Yahweh among the Israelites. A minority proposed that Baal was a native Canaanite deity whose cult was identified with or absorbed aspects of Hadad's. Regardless of their original relationship by the first millennium BCE, the two were distinct. Hadad was worshipped by the Aramaeans, and Baal by the Phoenicians and other Canaanites. The Phoenician Baal is generally identified with either El or Dagon. Baal is well attested in surviving inscriptions, and was popular in theophoric names throughout the Levant. But he is usually mentioned along with other gods, his own field of action being seldom defined. However, Ugaritic records show him as the weather god, with particular power over lightning, wind, rain, and fertility. The dry summers of the area were explained as Baal's time in the underworld, and his return in autumn was said to cause the storms which revived the land. Thus the worship of Baal in Canaan, where he eventually supplanted El as the leader of the gods and patron of kingship, was connected to the region's dependence on rainfall for its agriculture, unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, which focused on irrigation from their major rivers. Anxiety about the availability of water for crops and trees increased the importance of his cult, which focused attention on his role as a rain god. He was also called upon during battle, showing that he was thought to intervene actively in the world of man, unlike the more aloof El. The Lebanese city of Baalbek was named after Baal. The Baal of Ugarit was the epithet of Hadad, but as the time passed, the epithet became the god's name, while Hadad became the epithet. Baal was usually said to be the son of Dagon, but appears as one of the sons of El in Ugaritic sources. Both Baal and El were associated with the bull in Ugaritic texts, and it is symbolized both strength and fertility. The virgin goddess Anat is his older sister and wife. She is sometimes mentioned bearing his child. He held special enmity against snakes, both on their own and as representatives of Yamu, the Canaanite sea god and river god. He fought the Tananu, the twisted serpent, Lotan, the fugitive serpent, and the mighty one with 7 heads. Baal's conflict with Yamu is now generally regarded as the prototype of the vision recorded in the 7th chapter of the biblical book of Daniel. As a vanquisher of the sea, Baal was regarded by the Canaanites and Phoenicians as the patron of sailors and the seagoing merchants. As vanquisher of Mot, the Canaan death god, he was known as Baal Rapiuma and regarded as the leader of the Rephaim, the ancestral spirits, particularly those of ruling dynasties. From Canaan, worship of Baal spread to Egypt by the Middle Kingdom and throughout the Mediterranean, following the waves of Phoenician colonization in the early 1st millennium BCE. He was described with diverse epithets, and before Ugarit was rediscovered, it was supposed that these referred to distinct local gods. However, as explained by Day, the texts at Ugarit revealed that they were considered local manifestations of this particular deity, similar to the local manifestations of the Virgin Mary in the Roman Catholic Church. In those inscriptions, he is frequently described as Victorious Baal, Mightiest One or Mightiest of the Heroes, the Powerful One, and in his role as patron of the city Baal of Ugarit. As Baal Zephon, he was particularly associated with his palace atop Jebel Akru, or Accra, the ancient Mount Sapanu, and classical Mons Cassius. He is also mentioned as Winged Baal and Baal of the Arrows. Phoenician and Aramaic inscriptions describe Baal of the Lebanon, Baal of Sidon, Baal of the Heavens, Baal Shamim or Shemayan, or Adar, or Hammon. Baal Hammon was worshipped in the Tyrian colony of Carthage as their supreme god. This position developed in the 5th century BCE, following the severing of its ties to Tyre. Following the 480 BCE Battle of Himera. Like Hadad, Baal Hammon was a fertility god. Inscriptions about Punic deities tend to be rather uninformative, and he has been variously identified as a moon god and as Dagon, the grain god, rather than the bull. Baal Hammon was associated with the ram and depicted with his horns. The archaeological record seems to bear out claims in Roman sources that the Carthaginians burned their children as human sacrifices to him. He was worshipped as Lord of the Two Horns, particularly at an open-air sanctuary at Two Horn Hill, across the bay from Carthage. His consort was the goddess of Tanit. The epithet Hammon is unclear most often. It is connected with the NW Semitic Hammon Brazier, and associated with the role as a sun god. Rainan and Gibson linked it to Hammon between Tyre in Lebanon and Acre in Israel, and Cross and Lipinski to Hammon or Kaman, the classical Mount Amanus and modern Nur Mountains, which separate northern Syria from southeastern Cilicia. Baal appears 90 times in the Hebrew Bible in reference to various gods. The priests of the Canaanite Baal are mentioned numerous times, most prominently in the first book of Kings. Many scholars believe that this describes Jezebel's attempt to introduce the worship of the Baal of Tyre, Melkart, to the Israelite capital Samaria in the 9th century BCE. Against this, Day argues that Jezebel's Baal was more probably Baal Shamem, the Lord of the Heavens, a title most often applied to Hadad, who is also often titled just Baal. 1 Kings chapter 18 records an account of a contest between the prophet Elijah and Jezebel's priests. Both sides offered a sacrifice to their respective gods. Baal failed to light his followers' sacrifice, while Yahweh's heavenly fire burnt Elijah's altar to ashes, even after it had been soaked with water. The observers then followed Elijah's instructions to slay the priests of Baal, after which it began to rain, showing Yahweh's mastery over the weather. Other references to the priests of Baal describe their burning of incense in prayer, and their offering of sacrifice while adorned in special vestments. The title, Baal, was a synonym in some context of the Hebrew Adon, Lord, and Adonai, my Lord, still used as aliases of the Lord of Israel, Yahweh. According to some scholars, the early Hebrews used the names Baal, Lord, and Baali, my Lord, in reference to the Lord of Israel, just as Baal farther north designated the Lord of Ugarit or Lebanon. This occurred both directly and as the divine element of some Hebrew theophoric names. However, according to others, it is not certain that the name Baal was definitely applied to Yahweh in the early Israelite history. The component Baal is proper names is mostly applied to worshippers of Baal or descendants of the worshippers of Baal. Names including the element Baal, presumably in reference to Yahweh, include the judge Gideon, also known as Jerubbaal. The Lord strives. Saul's son Eshbaal, the Lord is great. And David's son Beliada, the Lord knows. The name Belial, the Lord is Jah, or Yahweh is Baal, combine the two. However, John Day states that as far as the names Ishbaal, Meribbaal, and Baliad are concerned, it is not certain whether they simply allude to the Canaanite god Baal, or are intended to equate Yahweh with Baal, or have no connection to Baal whatsoever. It was the program of Jezebel in the 9th century BCE to introduce into Israel's capital city of Samaria her Phoenician worship of Baal, as opposed to the worship of Yahweh that made the name anathema to the Israelites. At first, the name Baal was used by the Jews for their god without discrimination, but as the struggle between the two religions developed, the name Baal was given up by the Israelites as a thing of shame, and even names like Jerubbaal were changed to Jerubosheth. Hebrew Bosheth means shame. Eshbaal became Ishbosheth, and Meribbaal became Mephibosheth. But other possibilities also occurred. Beliada is mentioned renamed as Eliada, and Gideon's name Jerubbaal was mentioned intact but glossed as a mockery of the Canaanite god, implying that he strove in vain. Direct use of Baali continued at least as late as the time of the prophet Hosea, who reproached the Israelites for doing so. Brady Kell has suggested that references to cultic sexual practices in the worship of Baal in Hosea 2 are evidence of an historical situation in which Israelites were either giving up Yahweh worship for Baal or blending the two. Hosea's references to sexual acts being metaphors for Israelite apostasy. Baal Berith, Lord of the Covenant, was a god worshipped by the Israelites. When they went astray after the death of Gideon, according to the Hebrew Scriptures. The same source relates that Gideon's son Abimelech went to his mother's kin at Shechem and received 70 shekels of silver from the house of Baal-berith to assist in killing his 70 brothers from Gideon's other wives. An earlier passage had made Shechem the scene of Joshua's covenant between all the tribes of Israel. And El Yahweh, our God of Israel, a later one describes it as the location of the house of El-berith. It is thus unclear whether the false worship of the Baalim being decreed is the worship of a new idol or the continued worship of Yahweh. But by means of rites and teachings taking him to be a mere local god within a larger pantheon. The Hebrew scribes record the worship of Baal, threatening Israel from the time of the judges until the monarchy. The Deuteronomist and the present form of Jeremiah seem to phrase the struggle as monolatry or monotheism against polytheism or polytheism. Yahweh is frequently identified in the Hebrew scriptures with El Elyon. However, this was after a mixture with El in the process of religious syncretism. El became a generic term meaning God, as opposed to the name of a worshipped deity. And epithets, such as El Shaddai, came to be applied to Yahweh alone, while Jabal's nature as a storm and weather god became assimilated into Yahweh's own identification with the storm. In the next stage, the Yahwistic religion separated itself from its Canaanite heritage. First by rejecting Baal worship in the 9th century, then through the 8th to the 6th centuries with prophetic condemnation of Baal, sun worship, worship on the high places, practices pertaining to the dead, and other matters. Baal-zebub, meaning fly lord or lord of the flies, occurs in the 1st chapter of the 2nd book of Kings as the name of the Philistine god of Ekron. In it, Ahijah, king of Israel, is said to have consulted the priests of Baal-zebub as to whether he would survive the injuries from his recent fall. The prophet Elijah, incensed at this impiety, then foretold that he would die quickly, raining heavenly fire on the soldiers sent to punish him for doing so. Jewish scholars have interpreted the title of Lord of the Flies as the Hebrew way of calling Baal a pile of dung and his followers vermin, although others argue for a link to power over causing and curing pestilence, and thus suitable for Isaiah's question. The Septuagint renders the name of Beelzebub and as ball of flies. Symmachus the Ebionite rendered it as Beelzebul, possibly reflecting its original sense. This is being proposed to have been Ugaritic for Lord of the Home or Lord of the Heavens, outside of Jewish and Christian contexts. The various forms of Baal were indifferently rendered in classical sources as Baalis. An example is Josephus, who states that Jezebel built a temple to the god of the Tyrians, which they call Belus. This describes the Baal of Tyre, Melkart. In the interpretation Graeca, Baal was usually associated with Jupiter Belus, but sometimes connected with Hercules. Herman identifies the Damaris or Damarus mentioned by Philobablius as Baal. Baal-Haman, however, was identified with the Greek Cronus and the Roman Saturn as the African Saturn. He was probably never equated with Melkart, although this assertion appears in older scholarship. John Milton's 1667 epic Paradise Lost describes the fallen angels collecting around Satan, stating that through their heavenly names had been blotted out and raised, they would acquire new ones, wandering o'er the earth as false gods. Balaam and Ashtaroth are given as the collective names of the male and female demons respectively, who come from between the bordering flood of old Euphrates and the brook that parts Egypt from Syrian ground. Baal and derived epithets like Baalist were used as slurs during the English Reformation for the saints and their devotees. Indeed, Elias was among the messengers when he said to his people, Will you not fear? Do you call upon Baal and leave the best of creators, Allah your Lord and the Lord of your first forefathers? And they denied him, so indeed they will be brought for punishment, except the chosen God's servants, the sincere. We left for him to the latter generations. Peace be upon Eliasim. Bala properly, Balé, is the feminine form of Baal and was applied to various Levantine goddesses. It was also the name of several places in ancient Palestine. Another name of Kirjath Jearim, a city in Negev, given to Simon, also romanized as Bela in 1 Chronicles chapter 4 verse 29, and Bela in Joshua chapter 19 verse 3. A mount in Judah between Jabneel and Shekharon, maybe today's Magar. Belath is the name of either one or two towns in the Hebrew Bible. Its name is the female form of Baal. Joshua chapter 19 verse 44 lists Belath among Danite towns in the territory of the tribe of Dan. According to 1 Kings chapter 9 verses 17 to 19, Solomon either built or rebuilt several cities, including one named Belath, Balberith meaning Lord of the Covenant, and Elberith meaning God of the Covenant, or two gods, or one God worshipped in Shechem, in ancient Canaan, according to the Bible. The term for covenant appears also in Ugaritic texts in connection with Baal, and perhaps as Berith in Sanchuan Iathon's work. Judges is the only biblical book that mentions Baal Berith and El Berith. It is not clear whether they are actually one god or whether they are separate forms of Baal and El. Scholars suppose that he or they may have been worshipped for connections to fertility and vegetation, based on another passage in Judges. Also unclear is what covenant or covenants are referred to by the name Berith. Elsewhere, some of the Shechemites are called men of Hammer. This is compared to sons of Hammer, which in the ancient Middle East referred to people who had entered into a covenant sealed by the sacrifice of a hammer and ass. Children of Hammer or sons of Hammer itself appears in Genesis and Joshua, in both of which, as in Judges, Hammer is called the father of Shechem. Genesis also features a man named Hammer who ruled in the area of Shechem and had a son named Shechem. Rabbinic tradition equates Baal Berith with Beelzebub, the god of Philistine Ekron, in his euhemeristic account of the Phoenician deities. Sanchuniathon says that a certain Elion, called also the Most High, and a female named Beruth dwelt in the neighborhood of Byblos, on the coast of present-day Lebanon. They had two children, a male called Epigeus, Autothon or Sky, and a daughter called Earth. Because of the latter pair's beauty, the sky and the earth respectively were named after them. According to Sanchuniathon, it is from sky and earth that El and various other deities are born, though ancient texts refer to El as creator of heaven and earth. A relationship with Hebrew covenant, or with the city named Beirut, have both been suggested for Baruth. However, Robert Stieglitz showed how Baruth is best connected to Brat, a name for the primordial sea to home. The idol Baal-berith, which the Jews worshipped after the death of Gideon, was identical according to the rabbis, with Baal-zebub, the lord of flies, the god of Ekron in 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 2. He was worshipped in the shape of a fly, and Jewish tradition states that so addicted were the Jews to his cult that they would carry an image of him in their pockets, producing it and kissing it from time to time. Baal-zebub is called Baal-berith because such Jews might be said to make a covenant of devotion with the idol, being unwilling to part with it for a single moment. According to another conception, Baal-berith was an obscene article of idolatrous worship, possibly a simulacrum propi or priapi. This is evidently based on the later significance of the word beret, meaning circumcision. According to the admirable history written by Father Sebastian Michaelis in 1612, Baal-berith once possessed a nun in Axen province. In the process of the exorcism, Baal-berith volunteered not only his own name and the names of all the other demons possessing her, but the names of the saints who would be most effective in opposing them. These are some of the biblical names starting with B. Adonai Nisi, the Lord is our banner. God's blessings be upon us all.